Did you know that the plastics you throw out end up on your plate somehow? That means that every time you take seafood, you are likely to ingest plastic impurities that could cause cancer. NTV's Trevor Ombija joined the United Nations Environmental Program in an ocean cleanup in Mombasa and found out some startling facts.
Kenya will join the world in marking the World Environment Day on Monday, 5th of June. But the devastating effects of pollution, especially plastic pollution, still continues to wreak havoc.
This is the Indian Ocean, or part of the Indian Ocean, I should say. It covers about 70 million kilometers square, and it is the third largest ocean body in the world. We are in Watamu in Kilifi County. The beautiful pristine beaches cover almost every single part of this area. But this is not where the problem is. The problem is right in front of me. This is plastic that has been swept up by the tides into this one straight line. And this is the biggest challenge the ocean is currently facing in terms of pollution. And this plastic ends up on your table.
We drink water, we drink whatever, and then we just throw it. Fish would eat it. Different species in the fish in the ocean, they will eat it. They will digest, it will go through from the very young ages on how to litter, not to throw the bottles, not to litter everywhere, but to dispose in a very sound way all the trash that they will have after they have consumed.
Well, after work, the volunteers indulge in more, getting their mind off the devastating effects of pollution.
Unakuta mtu anakula, alafu anatupa ovyo ovyo, anachukua kitu amekula kwa karibu na ufuo na dustbin ziko, mtu anatupa tu eneo yote, na ukimwambia atakwambia beach ni ya kila mtu, kusi beach si yako.
It's really bad, as you've seen. It's really dirty, and the rubbish isn't entirely from Kenya. It's from all over, but we're getting a lot of plastics, especially now when this weather, cozy weather, is here. That's why we're getting a lot of rubbish on the beach.
It's not just the fish that are affected by the plastics. Turtles confuse plastic floating in the ocean for jellyfish. When they accidentally eat it, it gets stuck in their gut, causing slow starvation and eventually death.
As you can see here, this is the stuff that we found in the turtle's feces. This is plastic that's really, really see-through, so it almost looks like jellyfish, which is one of the natural foods of a hawksbill turtle. This one you can actually see it's either a candy bar wrapper or from a crisps packet, and this is just other types of foreign material that turtles should not be eating. So when turtles eat this sort of thing, their intestinal system blocks and they can actually die from it.
A floating turtle is a sign of distress. Water pollution is thought to lead to a disease called fibropapillomas, which is characterized by painful tumors which are cancerous, and it's a very painful disease that kills the sea turtles eventually.
If we don't change our mode of consumption, if we don't change the way we behave with the nature, if we don't ensure that we are connected to nature through a clean environment, through a clean nature, by collecting all those trash, all those plastic, in 2015 we will have more plastic in the ocean than fish.
This plastic material ends up in a recycling plant where a kilogram of plastic sells at between 3 shillings to 5 shillings for water bottles and between 6 to 8 shillings for other types.
So as the world marks the Environment Day, the question is, are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution? Trevor Ombija, NTV.
Right, Trevor Ombija asking, are you part of the problem or part of the solution? And it's World Environment Day, and it's a global celebration. In studio, I'm joined by Daniel Kony. He is the Deputy Director, Communication, UN Environment, right? Thank you very much for joining us. So let's begin where Trevor has left it. The question that is being asked today, especially at the coast, is, are they part of the problem or part of the solution? Where should we be?
Well, we are all part of the problem and we are all part of the solution. World Environment Day is the main day in the world when people come together, hundreds of thousands of people come together around the world for positive environmental change. And what we're seeing from your reporter on the coast is an example of what is going on right now, today, from different parts of the world, where people in their thousands are cleaning up our beaches, cleaning up our parks, and showing to governments, showing to communities that the environment matters.
Okay, and it's not a problem that is only in the coast, it's everywhere. This is just one example of where we need to get rid of the plastic. But how deep is this problem?
This problem is very deep, and it's not unique to Kenya. It's a global problem. You can go to the beaches of Indonesia or the United States or Australia, and you will find plastic on the beaches. This is an issue that needs a global attention, and the world is coming together in December here in Nairobi. We will see about 150 ministers of environment from around the world gather in Nairobi, and marine plastics, plastic waste going into our ocean is going to be one of the top issues that ministers will be discussing.
All right, it's just a moment of thoughtlessness, just a moment that causes this, because you're driving and you're chewing gum and suddenly you just decide to toss it overboard, or you are in a boat and you just decide to do it. That small action, how devastating is it to marine life and secondly to the environment?
Well, Ken, people throwing trash out of the window as they drive is only one part, and it's one small part of the problem. The larger issue is about how we manage our waste as communities. Whether you're in your house and you fill up your trash can with waste, where does that waste go? Now, one of the things that we have very much welcomed is an announcement that was made last weekend when the Indian Prime Minister used World Environment Day to announce a nationwide launch of a new waste management system for India. Now, these issues of where does the waste end up are issues that are shared, in many, many countries around the world. And too often we're seeing waste dumped into rivers, it gets washed out to sea, and so it's a much larger issue than just people throwing cigarette butts or throwing chewing gum out the windows of the cars. But it's an issue that we all share. We can't point to our governments and say, well, please fix it. It's an issue that we all together have to share.
But you agree that governments can fix this, and in Kenya they have taken an initiative to ensure this is fixed, for example, by the plastic bans. Yes. So the governments can do it?
The governments can do it, and we're very much in favor of and support the action by the Kenyan government in trying to eradicate plastic. But plastic is a very useful commodity for our societies. So you can't just flick a switch and all of a sudden there is no plastic, in our societies. You go to a supermarket, the food you buy is often wrapped in plastics. They put plastic, you get a plastic bag when you buy to take your goods home. So it's a gradual transition, people becoming aware that by throwing plastics out, that we are wasting a resource. As your correspondent showed, down at the coast now, there are recycling plants where plastic is getting 3 shillings a kilo. So plastic has a value, and it's up to us, up to our communities, to make sure that resource is not thrown away.
Okay, but first, what we have to look at, because even what's happening in the coast, you must first put a value to the plastic.
Yes.
But putting the value to the plastic is one big problem also, right? How do you start by putting value to the plastic? Why can't we concentrate in getting rid of plastic? Rwanda has done it successfully. Yes, why don't we concentrate on that first?
Very much. I think it's very encouraging that people are encouraged to when they go shopping, to take a bag that they can reuse. Put your groceries into a cloth bag. Don't ask for a plastic bag. In different countries, for example in Europe, it may be still possible to get a plastic bag from the supermarket, but you must pay for it. You pay a few cents to get that plastic bag. So by putting a value on it, it discourages you as a consumer from taking the plastic, and it encourages you to bring reusable bags, which are good for the environment and good for society.
Well, but even if you look at the development, you're giving an example of Europe, where they were probably many, many years ago. That's where we are currently. And this definitely has a ripple effect. For example, the factories that manufacture plastic, you know. So it's an idea that needs to be well thought out. Are we in the process of even thinking about this to begin with?
But, yes, but Kenya is not so far behind. I mean, there is Europe, I mean, France only a couple of years ago made major reductions in its plastic. So Kenya is up there at the forefront with many countries in trying to reduce its plastics. This is a global challenge that the world is now starting to recognize.
All right, as we wait for the other guests, probably let's reflect on the Environment Day specifically. What is the theme for this year, and what is the focus? What is the wider focus?
Well, the theme this year, Ken, is encouraging people to get out and connect with nature. Why? Because if we are going to, as a society, if we are going to value nature, then people need to understand and appreciate nature. So here in Kenya, we're encouraging people to get out to national parks, go and hike up mountains, go to your national park, or just go to whatever has a meaning for you in terms of nature.
All right. And we are joined in studio by John Kioli. He's the chair, Kenya Climate Change Working Group, and also a nominee to the Climate Change Council. Thank you very much for joining us. And we have been speaking also to Daniel Kony. He is the Deputy Director, Communication, UN Environment. We have been discussing a raft of issues, and we're looking at the theme for this year's celebration. And we just want you to reflect, before we get into this discussion, reflect on the World Environment Day and the theme, getting out to interact with nature. What do you think?
I think, thank you very much, Ken, for hosting me this morning. World Environment Day is a reflection of connecting to nature. If you look at what ecosystems provide to us as human beings, it's enormous. Look at bees, for example. They make sure that, you know, we have every crop, populated. We have these bees connecting, and all these bees are part of the ecosystems. If you look at sand, for instance, the enormous job it does in cleaning water in rivers. These are ecosystems, products that sometimes we assume very much. So for us to connect with the nature is a very important thing, because after connecting with nature, we'll value what the nature provides to us. So for me, this is a very good theme in terms of what the ecosystem provides to us and how we can connect to it as human beings.
All right. And the failure to which we are where we are currently as a country, first, let's not go global. Let's talk about Kenya currently. We know there is an attempt by the Ministry of Environment to ban plastics. Let's begin with that. And we have a story that we ran earlier on the cleanup of the Indian Ocean. Our reporter, Trevor Mbija, told us the devastating effects. Some of the things we assume. I am a vegetarian, but I do seafood. And one of the things that I didn't know, that anytime I eat the seafood, I'm ingesting plastic. So these are things that we assume, and eventually this contributes to probably causing cancer in human beings, you know?
Look at issues of flooding in Nairobi. All these, sewage systems are being clogged by plastic. Look at the animal health. Look at towns like Garissa. Look at towns like Isiolo. Look at towns like Narok. There is a big problem of plastics. And animals are eating all these plastics. Eventually, the animal health is also affected. All the countries, most of the countries in Europe are not using plastics anymore. Here in Rwanda, they are not using plastics anymore. If we switch from plastics to other modes of carrying our things in supermarkets and other, outlets, I think it will be a huge impact in terms of our environment. If you look, for instance, in Europe, after you buy your purchases, the next thing they'll ask you, do you want a bag? This bag is also put some premium. There's a cost to it. You have to buy it. So they assume you should come with a bag so that we avoid plastics. Okay. And look at the motivation of even these plastics. People want to advertise in these plastics. So the issue of carrying is not the issue, but also these people want to advertise in plastics, so they want to advertise in these paper bags, and all these supermarkets are doing that.
Okay.
So, I mean, the motivation has to come to an end, and we switch to other products.
Okay. Kuni, the fear here, probably in the Kenyan case, because we know this is a battle that has to be won by environmentalists, is the other businesses losing out. If you measure the value of losing out business and the value of restoring the environment for sustainability, which one is greater?
Well, I mean, a healthy environment underpins our economy. So if investments and shifts in policy that move towards a healthy environment, such as eradicating plastic bags, it strengthens the economy and it creates new opportunities. If you move retail away from handing out plastic bags, well, that creates a new opportunity for cloth bags. Mm-hmm. If you put a value on recycling plastic, well, that then creates an industry in its own. That the plastic that can be thrown away from all the thousands and hundreds of thousands of households, all of a sudden, there's an industry in recycling it.
Okay, so there's still value that can be put to these plastics, but let's begin right where it begins, the disposing of these plastics. That's the problem. You have resided in Kenya and you are Kenyan. Where do we begin in terms of collecting the plastics off the streets? Do we begin by organizing massive cleanups all over the country and specific areas? For example, the environment I live is clean, but when you move out of that environment, then you start meeting all this trash, and 90% of that trash is plastic. So where do we begin? Because we know even the nearest example that we can use is Rwanda. You travel to Rwanda at the airport, you'll be asked specifically if you're carrying plastics, and it will be confiscated right at the airport. You'll not be allowed to go into the city of Kigali with the plastic. So where would we begin, for example?
I think, thanks, Ken. First of all, it has to begin with yourself. What value do you put to nature? Yourself, do you believe in it in terms of the use of plastic has to come to an end? First of all, the self. Secondly, we must reduce from where it is generated from in terms of the industry that are generating these plastics. It's unfortunate some jobs may come to an end. But if you look at issues of technology and where we are going to, such things like, you remember Kodak and Fiji films, the ones we used to do photos with. Where are they now? Mm-hmm. Where are those jobs now? They turn to the digital era.
And it still works for them.
It still works for them.
Yes.
You can't keep on saying you want vinyl records where we used to have music. You can't keep on saying I want cassettes. It has been overtaken by time. It has to come to an end and you have to switch. The third thing is now to clean up, to have advocacy, national advocacy on cleaning up what has already been deposited.
But even that, there's a lot of resistance. You even know the war that is currently Judy Wakungu is trying to fight. There's a war that goes on and never ends. Is it lack of goodwill?
I think we need to support the government and what things that have been put. And I take this war of plastics similar to what Honorable, the late Michuki, did with the matatus. It was painful. People worked for about a month. But after that, there are some guidelines that still are in the systems today.
Okay.
End of plastic, it will take time. Mm-hmm. And we have to look for structures of how these people will start living and come up with sort of mitigation measures on their livelihoods and embrace technology in terms of what else can they do. But the war has to be there. Even gold has to pass through furnace. And then after that, you get a good product.
And it's not the first time that Kenya is attempting to do this. Probably, let's reflect on why it failed for the first time. Because I think there was a recommendation on, I don't know, is it measured in gauge or something that was supposed to be sent out there. But it failed terribly. It never worked. That's a few years ago, probably 6 years ago, when Kenya first attempted to get rid of the plastic. But it failed. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was not here in Kenya at the time, so I can't speak to that. But I've seen how other countries have moved away from plastic. But you know, as John says, this takes time. The infrastructure has to be in place. The alternatives have to be in place. You can't overnight suddenly tell the retail business no more plastic bags. What are they going to use instead? So that thinking and that work does have to happen. But there is value in having a cutoff date, because oftentimes things drag. you know, unless
if
you don't set a date.
Yes.
Right. But also in terms of changing, you know, the culture of dissuading people from just throwing plastic out the window of their car. This is something, again, it's a cultural shift. This takes time, and it needs local advocates. It needs leaders. I've seen this happen in other countries, and it can take a generation where people look at the side of the road and feel a sense of ownership over their environment.
Right.
And it upsets them if they see the trash.
Okay, well, why did you fail the first time you attempted to do this?
I think it's the will of leadership and the will of the people to embrace that, and the fear of what will happen. Mm-hmm. So I think if we change from inside, first of all, and appreciate that actually this is a problem as Kenyans, then to the leadership to say, okay, this has to happen. And then the two meet in the middle to see if this happens, what are the mitigation measures in terms of the livelihoods of millions who are depending on these paper bags. What alternative livelihoods are we giving them? But look at the bigger picture in terms of environment. Look at where we are. Look at Vision 2030 in terms of attaining it. Are we going to attain it with plastic papers? No. It's going to hinder attainment of Vision 2030 in terms of development.
All right, as we take a break, a question I asked Connie earlier, and this question is, if you measure, for example, the amount of jobs, the amount of livelihood that may be lost as a result of totally banning plastics vis-a-vis the amount of gain we have if we completely get rid and clean the environment, which one is greater?
I think it's an issue of the small boy who was holding a butterfly and is asking you, is it dead or alive? If it's dead, he releases it. If it's alive, he will kill it. Why I'm saying this is it depends with the leadership. It depends with us as human beings to accept. And I gave you a simple example of how we used to store our data. We used to have those big floppy drives. Mm-hmm. And people, millions of people working in that industry. Where are they now? They must be somewhere. Mm-hmm. Look at M-Pesa. M-Pesa has connected close to 200,000 agents all over the world. And these people have just depended on IT. IT is a secret to all this that is going to change the livelihoods of people doing plastics. It's not easy. It's not easy for me, but we have to say this is the way forward.
All right, so let's talk environment. And as I mentioned, our experts are already in studio. Let me begin with Jackson Bambo, who was not here earlier. And Jackson, it's World Environment Day. First, your reflection and the theme, interacting more with the environment. What do you think about it?
Thank you. Thank you, Mjungu. First of all, we must acknowledge that this day is our day as Kenyans and also as global citizens. For instance, when you say connecting people with nature, this is something which has been there since time, because you have to look at energy. Where do we get, what is our main source of energy? We have to look at water. We need to look at wildlife. As you are all aware, Kenya's economy is driven by wildlife, which is tourism. So tourism is based on nature. You look at water, the soils, the forests, and the wildlife itself. We must also know what is the value of our nature as Kenyans. We must know what's the cost of one elephant, what's the price. Look at the timber. Do we have the economic value that we attach to that timber that we use in our homes, in our schools? How many people use paper every day? I'll say every one of us use paper. All this is nature.
Okay. All right, for the Kenya Forestry, what are they doing to mark this day?
Okay, we have a number of activities lined up today. We have cleanup campaign, which we are also doing.
Cleanup inside the forest?
No, within. It's outside the forest.
But within your environment?
Within our environment, because it's taking place at Muguga shopping center. We are doing the cleanup. Then later on, we'll be having a tree planting within the Muguga forest. Then later today in the evening, we also have a photographic exhibition at the Canadian Embassy residence. So these are some of the things that we are doing today. And we're also engaging the youth and the children in primary schools. We are trying to enlighten them and creating awareness on the importance of this day.
Okay. How important to you, for example, as the coordinator of the Kenya Forestry Working Group, how important for you is this day?
It's very critical to us. For instance, we must understand what are the challenges that we face. Then from there, we need to say, why is it important?
What is the main challenge that you have realized?
One of the challenges that we have as a country is the issue with global warming.
Global warming.
You are aware today the weather is very bad outside there. It's very cold, which is unusual. Another thing that we're also facing is the challenge with deforestation. We have a lot of massive deforestation, which is unsustainable at the end.
When you talk about deforestation, that is understandable. You can relate. But when you talk about global warming, how do you explain global warming to the viewer?
To the viewer, which means layman, I'll say one of them is the rising temperatures. Then we also have unpredictable weather patterns, especially to the rural farmer. You cannot tell when to plant and when to harvest, because
which is a real problem now.
The real problem now, we have excessive rain sometimes, and also very
unpredictable, because even the rainy months can no longer be predicted.
Sure.
You can no longer know how or when to plant, and that is a reality. So when you talk about global warming to someone who wants to relate with this, it's easier said, explain in terms of, do you realize it rains when it shouldn't be raining? Or do you realize when it rains, it's a lot of rain? We don't expect to say short rainfall, and then suddenly it's not short, it's actually a lot of rainfall. For example, my county, it's been raining throughout.
Yes.
And I was in Baringo a week ago. They told me since probably last year, December, it's never rained adequately and no one is planting. So that's the best explanation for global warming. Let's bring this home. And we watched a story earlier that I want all of you, we had Connie commented on this story, but you're not here, so you didn't have the opportunity. And today is the World Environmental Day. And of course, in studio, I have experts who are helping us talk about this. And we were speaking to Jackson Bambo, the National Coordinator of Kenya Forest Working Group. And my question was, we ran a story on the effects of the plastic, some of the things that we don't realize when we do some of these things. And the major one that struck me is the fact that we are so affected, yet we don't realize, even in the foods we consume. Put this to perspective.
Okay, one of the things that I'll be able to speak about in terms of plastic bags, it was a real problem. And the earlier we deal with it, the better. Because look at our drainage systems. It's all clogged with polythene bags. Look at our farms. If you go to dryland areas, Garissa, if you are going through those roads, all the fences are full of plastic bags. So once we deal with it, the better. Our food reserves, the farms that we are where we plant our food crops, 35% of it is plastic, is full of plastic bags. So we need to deal with it now than wait for it to be dealt with later.
So this is a real problem.
It's a real problem.
All right. Having acknowledged is a real problem, let's talk about the global environmental issues now. And I'll start with John. John, last week we had President Trump withdrawing or commencing the process of withdrawing America from the Paris Agreement. Put this to perspective. What does this really mean to withdraw the U.S., the superpower of this world, from the Paris Agreement? Is this possibly, are we going to have a ripple effect? But first, let's put the Paris Agreement into perspective for us to understand what is it about in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Ken. On the 12th of December 2015, more than 195 countries in the world came up with an agreement under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, in an agreement to have mitigation measures, adaptation measures, and financial mechanisms that can be able to run issues of climate change. The key issues that, to just come down to the local language in terms of what it means, every country agreed in having what we call national determined contribution. You remember before, we were saying only developed countries give money to non-developed countries in terms of climate change. We came up with what we call the NDCs, National determined contributions whereby countries can now say these emissions are going to be cut by this time. So the other key thing that came up is the issue of financial mechanisms. There was a commitment by the developed countries to give a certain amount of money to the developing countries because of what we call historical, I call them historical injustices in terms of what was done during agrarian revolution, what was done during industrialization, all these greenhouse gases that were emitted, and we are not responsible as developing countries. They have to bring us some enough finances to be able to cover for that emissions that were done, that so that we can start some projects towards cutting down on emissions.
Green. Okay.
Yes.
All right. And Connie, how did the world react to this withdrawal, and was it for good reason?
I mean, the world has reacted. The world is disappointed, but the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement does in no way stop or derail this process. India, China, and the European Union are stepping up. They have taken bold steps to move towards delivering on the pledges they made in Paris. The world is not going to sit back and wait for the United States here. The world is moving. This is unstoppable because we have no choice. So one nation has made a political decision. We have to live with that.
Okay.
We move on.
All right. Straight after that, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said that he's still hoping the businesses, the big corporations in the US can still drive this agenda. Is it likely to happen now that the president, the political head, has decided to take a particular direction with this?
Okay, first of all, it's my prayer that those who drafted the accord, the Paris itself, should be able to help us get these people to be within the system until 2020. That's our prayer. The next thing that we are also looking at is the industries in the US. They need to just come out as individual companies and support the process.
Okay.
Itself, yeah.
In Kenya, have we done enough? And I'll start with John. Have we done enough instead of, even looking at the Act, the Climate Change Act, have we done enough in terms of putting measures to ensure that we contain climate change?
Yes, thank you. In terms of, if I could go back to the Paris Agreement,
okay,
so that I can connect it through. If you look at Article 2 of the Paris Agreement, it talks about every country limiting its emission up to 1.5 degrees. Number 2, Article 7 talks about adaptation measures which each country is going to put. Article 9, 10, and 11 talks about the financial mechanisms, which the US government is against.
Against, yes. There's a bad deal for them.
I really value the political statement that the United States gave, but also disappointed as a civil society that we are not going to get the share of finances from the US in terms of Article 9, 10, and 11. Number 2, the issue of coal mining in the US. I don't know if the President of the United States was adequately advised, because we cannot go back to agrarian revolution where we're using coal. We must embrace renewable energy. We must embrace new technology. Even the jobs that are thought of being created by coal, they can be created by technology. The issue of technology can gap that measure. Coming back to Kenya, last year, in the month of May, on the 5th, the president signed the Climate Change Act. It has about 4 components. One is the creation of the Climate Change Council, which is chaired by the president. It has several cabinet secretaries. It has the private sector. It has the civil society, and it has the indigenous and also the academia. All these council members are going to advise the country in the right perspective. Number 2, it formed a climate change fund, which is a basket of resources that can not only be used by the government, but also the civil society, the private sector, the academia, in terms of developing of the climate change. It also formed the Climate Change Directorate in the Ministry of Environment, which is very key in terms of linking the national government and the county government in terms of climate change. And for me, this is a bold step in terms of the president signing this Climate Change Act. in terms of running issues of climate change. Remember, policy, legislative tools are the guiding tools that can make impact in terms of climate change. So if the county governments embrace issues of climate change act that are encapsulated in the Climate Change Act, then it will be very easy to mainstream climate change issues in the CIDPs of the counties.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, we are pressed for time, and I'm told that we have to wind up, but I'll give you an opportunity finally to reflect on the World Environment Day and tell us your expectation going forward, and probably tell us if you believe that indeed we can do it as Kenyans. We'll start with you.
First of all, we must believe that we can do it. We have the will. We have the Forest Act Conservation Management of 2016. It has a clause which tells us to increase our forest cover to 10%. We also have the Climate Change Act of 2016, which says the National Climate Change Council should allocate funds to various counties to ensure that they implement climate change-related projects. First of all, the government and through the president, they should fully constitute the council, because I'm aware the gender issue is still an issue. They need to address it. People should be the indigenous people should be nominated, and the issues with the two-third gender rule should also be applied. Okay. Then thirdly, when we talk of energy, we need to address issues that promote energy efficiency in terms of technology. We need to embrace solar. It has worked. We need to embrace it and ensure that the government subsidizes the cost so that the rural people, the rural poor, can be able to access these facilities.
All right.
Yeah.
Connie?
Ken, I'm an optimist, but the actions that have been taking place across Kenya today show that it is possible, and we will do it. From the Kenyan coast to Nakuru to Mount Kenya to Dadaab, there are thousands of people who are getting out into nature, who are taking action. They're planting trees, they're picking up trash, they're talking to civil society, they're talking to the government. Kenya is moving forward, and I'm very encouraged by what we see today.
All right. And finally,
from a global position, the agricultural sector is climate sensitive. It depends on particular rainfall. It supports 24% of our GDP. Climate change, an increase of even 1 degree will affect tea sector, will affect coffee sector. We need to do something in terms of climate change from a global perspective. Secondly, we need to take it up ourselves in terms of the change belongs to you, not the other person.
All right, and John, you have an opportunity being the nominee to the council, Climate Change Council, right? Yes. So there's an opportunity right there. Thank you very much, gentlemen. John Kioli is the chair of Kenya Climate Change Working Group and also the nominee to the Climate Change Council. And all the best. And Daniel Coney is the deputy Director Communication UN Environment. Thank you very much for speaking to us. And Jackson Bambo, the National Coordinator, Kenya Forest Working Group. Thank you very much also for speaking to us.